In late 1941, Batman creators Bill Finger and Bob Kane were looking to create a new villain for the Dark Knight, but had no idea who or what it would be. They then got inspiration from two different sources. One, the Dick Tracy villain Broadway Bates, a portly man with a pointy Pinocchio nose and a monocle. And two, the mascot for Kohl's menthol cigarettes, Willie the Penguin. Taking the superficial traits of these two characters and blending them together, Finger and Kane came up with the Penguin. The Penguin first appeared in Detective Comics 58, with a cover date of December. The story was untitled, although in retrospect it's been given the title one of the most perfect frame-ups. In the story we're introduced to a bizarre and goofy looking fella going by the moniker the Penguin. A man of sophisticated taste, we first meet him at an art exhibit, although he ain't there to admire the pictures. Penguin is there to rob the place. After a successful heist, Pengers contacts the city's biggest crime lord, simply known as the Boss. Pengy wants to join his gang and rob the art exhibit to prove his worth. Plenty impressed with the caper, the Boss accepts the odd fellow's application. With his brilliant criminal mind, it's soon the Penguin who dictates the gang's plans, while the Boss sits back and relaxes. Not before long though, the Boss sees it fit to remind Pengy who's the real leader, to which the Penguin responds with a bullet fired from the umbrella he always carries. Turns out his umbrella is actually a hidden weapon. The grotesque bird of ill omen thus takes the Boss's place as leader of the gang, and as a result now commands all organized crime in the city. Quite a step up. Naturally, it doesn't take too long before he attracts the attention of the Batman, but the Gentleman of Crime has a response to this contingency as well. Through a sophisticated plot, he frames the Dark Knight for a crime, and then attacks the police transport, making it seem as if the Batman made an escape. With Batman captured and wanted by the law, while he himself is in the clear, the Penguin is free to loot the entire city. Of course, due to the intervention of Robin the Boy Wonder, Batman was set free and the Penguin's gang was broken up. In the end, our hero's name was cleared, but the villain himself actually escaped, avoiding capture. Thus, the stage was set for the greatest rivalry in comics, the dynamic duo versus that ingenious foul-feathered fowl. In this very first tale, the Penguin already had many of his typical characteristics, like his affinity for literature, style, and sophistication. His iconic trick umbrellas were also present. I already mentioned the gun umbrella, but he also used a knockout gas umbrella and an acid spraying umbrella. The character was, however, not named, only going by an alias, Mr. Boniface. The Penguin proved so popular he was brought back in the very next issue of Detective Comics. This story, titled King of the Jungle, again by Finger and Kane, saw the Penguin return and try a new scheme of devious crime. This time his racket was to apprehend wanted criminals and trade them in for a bounty. Then he helped them escape prison and share the reward. It was a very successful racket, that is until that meddling dynamic duo decided to butt in once again. The Penguin avoided capture this time too though, jumping into the ocean to escape the Batman's fist. His body was never found, and it was assumed he drowned, but we know better. Naturally, the Penguin soon returned again, and the Joker, Batman's nemesis, now at last had a rival in crime. This blackbird of banditry quickly became the dynamic duo's second most popular and recurring foe. In Batman number 25, published in 1944, the two kings of Gotham City's underbelly finally faced off, competing over who could get their hands on a prized emerald first, thus proving their superiority. Naturally, because of Batman, neither of them won. It was nevertheless a historic meeting, and if nothing else, this appearance certainly solidified the Penguin's status as the Batman's top foe, right next to the Clown Prince of Crime. In 1946, the Batman Sunday newspaper strip featured a tale called Oswald Who, which saw Pengy's Aunt Miranda pay a visit to Gotham City. In this story, we finally got to know the character's real name, Oswald Chesterfield Cobblepot. The golden age of comic books had certainly also been a golden age for the Buccaneer of Birds, but that would soon change as we entered the 1950s. By the time the Silver Age rolled in, Oswald Cobblepot appeared a lot less than he used to, and between 1956 and 1963, the once number 2 Rogue didn't make a single appearance. This was a time when the Batman stories chiefly ignored the old Rogues gallery, and instead featured ridiculous tales where the heroes fought aliens, robots, rainbow creatures, giants, dragons, aliens, and more aliens. Did I mention aliens? Yeah, a lot of aliens. Anyway, when the Penguin finally did return, fittingly in a story titled The Return of the Penguin, it was treated like the comeback of an old, forgotten character. The opening page even says, "Perhaps you're not aware of it, but Batman once had an enemy who rivaled the Joker in crime and cunning. His name? The Penguin." So I guess at one point, even the Penguin himself was once a forgotten supervillain. After this triumphant return, Oswald Cobblepot went on to appear a bit more often than he'd done, but still not quite as frequently as during the Golden Age. His next appearance took place in Batman 169, published in 1965. The story, called Partners in Plunder, saw the old bird run out of ideas for clever crimes, thus deciding to trick Batman into unknowingly plotting his capers for him. This comic would prove to be faithful, as the very next year, the plot of Partners in Plunder would be used as a basis for the character's very first appearance outside comic books. The Penguin, played by Burgess Meredith, appeared in the second two-parter of the live-action Batman TV series in early '66. The episodes were called Fine Feathered Finks, The Penguin's a Jinx, and as mentioned, borrowed the plot from Batman 169. With this two-part episode, the foul-feathered fiend was launched into the mainstream. He continued to appear frequently on the show, and rose as one of its most popular and well-known villains, surpassing perhaps even Cesar Romero's Joker in fame. The Penguin also appeared alongside the Joker, Catwoman, and the Riddler in the spin-off movie, Batman the Movie, also in '66. The character has thus made his leap to the big screen. The Man of 1,000 Umbrellas was soon a pop culture icon, thanks to the TV show, and many fans still to this day consider the '60s TV show take to be the definitive Penguin. Meredith introduced many now typical trademarks of the character, like his bizarre penguin laugh and his silly waddle walk. A couple of years later, in 1968, the Gentleman of Crime made his first jump into yet another form of media, namely animation. The Penguin appeared in the very first episode of the Adventures of Batman cartoon show, alongside his old pal, the Joker. Penguin went on to appear in numerous episodes of the show and became one of his main villains, just like in a live-action show. Ted Knight provided his and most of the Rogue's voices. Knight reprised his role a few years later in 1972 for the new Scooby-Doo movies, the cartoon show where the Scooby Gang teamed up with various celebrities and well-known characters every episode. 2 episodes featured Batman and Robin, and the villains were, of course, the Joker and the Penguin. In a short span, Pengers had now appeared on 3 TV shows. You didn't have to pick up a comic book to see the Penguin, you just had to switch on your TV. The character had by now, without a doubt, secured his spot as one of the biggest villains in fiction. In the comics though, it wasn't going quite as well. While the Penguin was the undisputed number 2 of the Rogues Gallery in the mainstream, at the start of the '70s he began to face some pretty heavy competition for that title in the comics. Following the cancellation of the live-action TV show and the drop of popularity of a campy Batman, DC refrained from using any of the rogues made famous by the show. This of course included that pedantic patriarch of predators. The Penguin made his last Silver Age appearance in 1968, and subsequently dropped off the face of the earth. Meanwhile, DC began to remodel the Rogues Gallery, introducing new villains and reintroducing old forgotten ones. The Penguin finally returned though in Batman 257, published in 1974. The story, titled Hail Emperor Penguin, was written by Dennis O'Neil and penciled by Irv Novick. Yet again, Oswald was presented as an old foe making a comeback of sorts, and despite his waning popularity among the readers, Penguin was declared the greatest criminal genius next to the Joker in the story. Batman even says it himself. But in reality, 2 other rogues were rising far beyond that of Pengers. 2 rogues who were at the time completely unknown to the mainstream: Two-Face and newcomer Ra's al Ghul. Following Hail Emperor Penguin, Ozzy appeared fairly scarcely. He wasn't being ignored, but it was clear the old bird was having trouble adapting to the times. The gruesome Two-Face and the deadly Ra's al Ghul were far better fits for the Bronze Age Batman. Of course, where the mainstream was concerned, Oswald was still on top. In 1977, the Penguin appeared in several episodes of yet another cartoon show, namely The New Adventures of Batman. The character was voiced by Lenny Weinrib. Due to his appearance on this show, Penguin was legally forbidden to be used in a Super Friends cartoon, which was also the reason Riddler and Scarecrow did not appear on the Batman show. However, by the time the final iteration of Super Friends began to air in 1985, The New Adventures of Batman had long since been cancelled. Thus, the Penguin made his first and only appearance in Super Friends in the episode The Case of the Stolen Powers. This episode, in which the old bird steals Superman's powers, did ironically not feature Batman. Penguin was voiced by Robert Morse in the episode, making him the 4th actor to portray the character. Super Friends was the 5th TV show in which Oswald appeared. In 1988, the Buccaneer of Birds was, alongside the Joker, the first Batman villain to appear in a video game. This took place in the second Batman game ever made, Batman the Cape Crusader, released for various different home computers, including the Amiga, the Atari ST, and the Commodore 64. Meanwhile, Two-Face and Ra's al Ghul still hadn't made a single appearance outside comic books. In the comics though, the 1980s saw the Penguin completely replaced by Two-Face as Batman's second biggest foe. By the late 80s, Oswald Cobblepot was so unpopular with the fans that many of them wrote to DC requesting they drop the character altogether. The same was happening with the Riddler at the time. These two villains were simply considered too camp for a post-Frank Miller Batman. While the creators at DC agreed concerning Edward Nygma, they valiantly stuck by the Penguin. In 1989, the task was given to writer Alan Grant, or perhaps he volunteered, to reintroduce Penguin as a deadlier and darker rogue. This he did with two comics. The first was Secret Origins Special, which for the very first time showed us the origin of the character. Despite the Penguin's long history, his backstory had oddly enough never really been explored. In this comic we learned that due to his physical appearance, Oswald Cobblepot was severely bullied as a child, particularly by one culprit, the savage kid known as Sharky. It was Sharky who came up with Ozzy's moniker, the Penguin. He used to beat the poor Oswald and force him to gulp down fish after fish, as penguins love fish, don't they? While not in school, Oswald spent his days in his mother's bird shop, reading books among his only friends, the birds. He was a lonely kid, and matters were only made worse by his overprotective mother. She forced Oswald to always carry an umbrella, as his father died of pneumonia due to lacking an umbrella during a rainy day. The constant umbrella only gave Sharky further ammunition to bully Oswald with. Eventually though, Ozzy finally had enough of his harasser, and decided to strike back. He trained his body for months, lifting weights, practicing boxing and martial arts. Soon the once fat little weakling was a powerful fighter. Needless to say, Sharky didn't stand a chance. He stopped bullying Oswald after that, but he did commit one final act of cruelty upon him, perhaps the cruelest. In revenge for his beating, Sharky killed all of Oswald's bird friends. Nevertheless, the Penguin's tragic childhood proved to be an important lesson, and served as a stepping stone for him to one day become the dreaded Buccaneer of Birds. Despite not really helping the character's popularity at the time, Secret Origins Special would end up being very influential, as most subsequent origin stories have taken inspiration from it. The part about Oswald being a physical fighter has been largely ignored though. Alan Grant's second attempt at revitalizing the Bird of Prey came in a two-parter published in Detective Comics, titled Snow and Ice. In this tale, Penguin was a far deadlier and more serious threat than in previous years. Gone was the camp, well most of it, and in its place stood a devious master criminal, plotting to steal a giant shipment of both cocaine and diamonds. Snow and Ice. This story also failed to really boost the Penguin's popularity, as did many following attempts in the early 90s, including the three-parter The Penguin Affair and the one-shot special Penguin Triumphant. Meanwhile, the character was being reimagined in other forms of media as well, and far more drastically. The Batman movie, released in 1989, was a massive hit, and Warner Brothers immediately commissioned a sequel. They gave director Tim Burton complete creative freedom, except for one demand. They wanted him to use the Penguin as the main villain. The old Blackbird of Banditry was, after all, still considered Batman's number 2 rogue outside the comics. Like many comic writers though, Burton didn't really know what to do with Oswald, as he didn't understand the character. To him, Penguin was a fat little guy in a top hat. And what do you do with that? The director rejected the initial script handed to him, written by the first film's author Sam Hamm, which featured a more traditional Penguin. Together with new screenwriters Daniel Waters and Wesley Strick, Burton conceived a completely new take on the gentleman of crime. Their version of the Penguin was a grotesque bird of ill omen indeed, a severely deformed freak raised in the sewers by penguins. The film, titled Batman Returns, was released in 1992 and starred Danny DeVito in the role of Oswald. This take on Penguin deviated from past iterations in most aspects. It was grotesque and bizarre, and the character completely lacked his eloquent and sophisticated manners from the comics, instead being a vulgar, perverse creep. The fans and critics were, and still are, split on the Batman Returns Penguin. Some love it, while others hate it. Everyone agrees though that it is a very unique take on the character. It also made a major impact in the mainstream, and still to this day, people who don't read comics consider Danny DeVito's Penguin to be the Penguin. To them, Penguin is supposed to be a gross freak raised in the sewers. Needless to say, the influence of major motion pictures can certainly not be overstated. Meanwhile, at the same time, the character appeared in his 5th cartoon show, namely the classic and celebrated Batman the Animated Series. In terms of characterization, this version was in style with the comics, but due to Batman Returns' coinciding release, Warner Brothers demanded that Oswald be portrayed with a similar design to the movie. We thus got a mishmash of classic Penguin and deformed DeVito Penguin. The character was one of the main villains on the show, his voice being provided by Paul Williams. Alongside the Joker, he was the only rogue to not be given an origin story, appearing as an already established criminal. During this era, the Gentleman of Crime also appeared in additional video games. Several games based on Batman Returns were released across different gaming consoles, including the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and Sega CD. Numerous games based on the animated series were also made, featuring Oswald alongside the show's other rogues. Penguin was struggling to get any respect in the comics, but everywhere else, the Man of 1,000 Umbrellas was still king. Alan Grant failed to revive the Penguin for the modern age, so in early 1995, the task was given to another writer, namely Chuck Dixon. Dixon premiered his brand new Penguins in Detective Comics 683. This Penguin no longer flew across the Gotham night sky on a rocket umbrella, stealing Fabergé eggs from museums. Instead, he parked his butt in a booth at the Iceberg Lounge and barked orders at henchmen. Oswald Cobblepot was reimagined by Dixon as more of a mob boss character, a shady businessman hiding behind the legitimate front of his nightclub, the Iceberg Lounge. He was the secret kingpin of Gotham City's underworld, controlling a large chunk of organized crime, as well as a vast web of information. The Penguin still kept many of his classic characteristics though, such as his intellectualism and his sense of style and sophistication. He also kept his trademark trick umbrellas, although they were greatly toned down. Somehow, this take on Penguin jived really well with the fans, and after over 2 decades, the Bird of Prey had finally found a way to fit in with modern post-camp Batman. The Penguin Was Reborn. Only once, briefly in '97, did the character return to his old roots. This took place in a 2-parter published across Batman 548 and 549, written by Doug Moench. In Moench's tale, Oswald is tired of his new lifestyle and longs back to the old days of daring capers and umbrella fights with the Batman. At the end of the story though, Ozzy resumes his new MO. It was clear the all-new, all-improved mob boss Penguin was here to stay. A few years later in 1999, Gotham City had been struck by an earthquake and declared a no man's land. While most people either fled or panicked, the Penguin saw this disaster as a great business opportunity. The foul bird used his networking and resources to declare himself king of the no man's land. If you wanted supplies, such as food or weapons, Penguin was the man to do business with. And devious as he is, the Penguin always took his cut. Meanwhile, the new take on Penguins was working so well, other forms of media immediately began to adapt it. When Batman the Animated Series went through its revamp and rebranded itself as the New Batman Adventures, the creators of the show saw the opportunity to reimagine their version of the Penguin to fit the current comics. Batman Returns being old news by then, they also saw their chance to use the visual design they'd wanted from the get-go. Thus, for the New Batman Adventures, we got a classic-looking Penguin operating out of the Iceberg Lounge. This version of the character also appeared as one of the main villains in the 2003 animated movie Batman Mystery of the Batwoman, set in the animated universe. While Paul Williams had voiced Penguin throughout the entire series, David Ogden Stiers filled in for him in this movie. The year after this film, we got a brand new animated Batman series, namely The Batman. The Penguin appeared in the 3rd episode, and as usual, went on to be one of the show's main villains. Unlike the New Batman Adventures had done though, this show did not go for a comic-accurate portrayal, instead opting to take its inspiration from Batman Returns. Just like in the film, Oswald is depicted as a more monstrous and deformed man. But it isn't just physical, as he's also characterized as crude and ill-mannered. Also like in Returns, he hails from a wealthy family, although one who's currently down on their luck. One big difference from most versions though is the portrayal of Ozzy as a physical fighter. Perhaps they took this from Secret Origins Special. A completely new addition to the character which we haven't seen anywhere else was his pair of female Kabuki goons, simply known as the Kabuki Twins. Tom Kenny voiced Penguin on the show, and he reprised his role for the 2005 movie The Batman vs. Dracula. Set in the same continuity as the series, this film saw Penguin accidentally resurrect Dracula, and he was then hypnotized into doing the Dark Lord's bidding, becoming a sort of Renfield character. This marked the 4th film Penguin had appeared in. So the 90s finally gave us the modern Penguin that we all know today. He found his place in the comics at last, and in other media the character was going strong as always. For the Blackbird of Banditry, the 2000s continue with numerous appearances outside the comics. It seemed like whenever a creator wanted to use a Batman villain who wasn't the Joker, they went with the Penguin. In the LEGO Batman video game series, Penguin appeared as both one of the main villains and a playable character. He also showed up in all the numerous animated direct-to-video movies based on the LEGO games. Tom Kenny yet again provided his voice in all of these. During this time, the character also appeared in his 7th cartoon show, Batman the Brave and the Bold. Like most Batrogues, he mainly appeared in cameos though. In 2009, the celebrated Batman Arkham game series was launched with Batman Arkham Asylum. Penguin didn't actually appear, but was referenced. He did appear in the 2011 sequel though, Arkham City. In this game, Penguin is one of the main villains, and the player runs into him and his army of goons several times throughout the story. Arkham City went with a gangster portrayal like the comics, but instead of a stylish gentleman, Ozzy was given a grittier look and characterization. Often called the Guy Ritchie Penguin, this version is more of a thug and talks with a heavy Cockney accent. Nolan North provided his voice. The character returned for all subsequent sequels, which includes the 2013 prequel Arkham Origins and 2015's Arkham Knight. Penguin's role was smaller in both of these games. He also appeared in a small role in the 2014 animated movie Batman Assault on Arkham, set in the Arkhamverse. Nolan North again provided the voice. This Guy Ritchie Penguin quickly became a fan favorite, and many fans have since been clamoring for a similar depiction to appear in a live-action film. Among the character's numerous other appearances include the computer game DC Universe Online, the animated films Animal Instincts and Mechs vs. Mutants set in the Batman Unlimited universe, the animated films Return of the Caped Crusaders and Batman vs. Two-Face set in the 60s TV show universe, the LEGO Batman movie, the Batman Telltale game, which featured a very boring-looking Ozzy, and many others. His most notable appearance as of late has naturally been on the live-action TV show Gotham, which began its airing in 2014. In this series, a young Oswald Cobblepot is depicted as one of the main characters, and we're shown his rise from a lowly henchman in Fish Mooney's mob, the king of Gotham's underworld, and then even to Gotham's mayor. The series portrays the old, or rather young bird, as a very complex rogue, with both sinister and noble intentions. He has since grown into a breakout character of sorts, arguably being the most popular part of the show. He's played by Robin Lord Taylor. Gotham marked the second time the pompous fiend appeared in a live-action TV series. Meanwhile, in the comic books, Penguin has been doing good, although nothing too noteworthy was published until the 5-issue miniseries Penguin, Pain and Prejudice in 2011. Written by Greg Hurwitz and penciled by Simon Kudransky, this comic offered a far more in-depth look at Oswald's origins and psyche than we'd gotten before. It borrowed some elements from Secret Origins Special, including an overprotective mother and Ozzy being bullied as a child, but went a lot further with these ideas. Since its publication, Pain and Prejudice has been hailed by many as the Penguin's killing joke, the character's greatest and definitive story. Currently at the making of this video, this is where we stand with the old Buccaneer of Birds. So, just who the hell is Batman's number 2 rogue? We've asked ourselves this with each of these videos. And I'm not talking about your personal favorite. I'm talking about who, after the Joker, has the biggest fan base, appears the most, and in the biggest stories. During the Golden and Silver Age, it was definitely the Penguin. It was even official. But as soon as Two-Face made his comeback in 1971, he pretty quickly replaced Pinky, with some competition also from Ra's al Ghul. Throughout the 80s and 90s, I'd say it was still Two-Face. But then sometime in the 2000s, he started to fade a bit. Riddler then suddenly rose up with the publication of Batman Zero Year, a villain who'd actually been ridiculed in the past. And who did DC recently pit the Joker against? The Riddler, in the War of Jokes and Riddles. That story is kind of like the modern Batman 25, where Joker and Penguin fought each other. So I'd say Eddie would appear to be the number 2 currently. Although, Bane recently had his own 12-issue maxi series, and he seems to appear pretty damn frequently too. The Scarecrow's fanbase has also been growing rapidly in later years. Who knows, maybe it's Kite Man with his damn hell yeah crap. In the mainstream though, it still seems to be Penguin. They just can't let go of old Ozzy. So what's next for the pompous bird of foul play? I've seen rumors that Warner Brothers are, once again, adamant that Penguin is used in the next live-action Batman movie. The history of Batman Returns repeats itself. I wouldn't mind this. In fact, I'm pretty adamant about it myself. Of all Batman rogues, Penguin needs to appear in a film again the most. It's been over 25 freaking years, and we have to replace this sewer freak with something a bit more comic accurate. Besides movies, I don't know if there are any other areas Cobblepot needs improvement. Certainly not animation or video games, he's done great there. The comics too, for the most part. I could easily make a top 15 Penguin stories video, so obviously not too much to complain about. Sure, you might argue that he should retake his throne as the number 2 rogue, but personally I see no need for that. So, which version of the grotesque bird of ill omen is your favorite? Burgess Meredith, Scooby-Doo, Batman Returns, the animated series, The Batman, the Arkhamverse, Gotham? Let me know in the comments. As for the future of this series, I have no idea where I really want to go. When I started it, I only had these 4 rogues in mind: Two-Face, Riddler, Scarecrow and Penguin. So now I've done that. I'm not sure if I want to continue, but also not sure if I want to quit. They're a lot of work, and a 3-minute video about some one-shot weirdo from the 60s still get a lot more views. I know I suggested Sinestro in the last video, but I'm not gonna promise anything. You may see more of these in the future, or you may not. We'll simply just have to see. Meanwhile, I've got plenty of other videos coming, and 2019 will have more variety regardless of this series. Anyway, as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.